A very good day, everyone. My name is Chan-Hoong. I'm from Singapore at the Singapore University of Social Sciences. Very welcome, a warm welcome to the IIR 2021 webinar. The title of my presentation is How Do Neighborhood Characteristics Shape Intercultural Context, Social Inclusion, and Wellbeing? Right. So this is what you see is an organic overview of multi-level data. We know that at the heart of that concentric circle is the individual, but the individual is affected by the family, the neighborhood. We know that, but we seldom incorporate that kind of data in our analysis, the environmental conditions. And what I'm going to do here is to introduce to you what are some potential variables, conditions that you can explore, and what you may expect from the environmental effect. Now, you see two figures on the top left-hand corner, right? One pigeon with the toenail intact, the other one without. And the reason why the pigeon on the right has the toenail missing is because that pigeon happens to fly close to or live around areas with high concentration of hair salons. Now, when in places with high concentration of hair salons, you see that there's a lot of hairballs produced by the hair salons. And when they go into the gutters and the pigeons land on those gutters, their feet will get trapped. And when they take off, the hairball will just pull out their toenails. So what happens to pigeons happen to humans as well, right? And we know for a fact that if you live close to convenience stores, that shapes your diet, and there's a higher percentage of obesity in neighborhoods that is located close to convenience stores, right? Because of the access and convenience for getting junk food. Right, so this outcome is not new, right? The findings are not new. We know that the effect of neighborhood has a great deal of impact in terms of health, for example, in neighborhoods with greater community bonding, strong community ties, you see lower incidence of drug abuse because residents, neighbors look out for one another. Similarly, if you live in or you grow up in a good neighborhood, there's a lot of good impact in terms of your health. Now, a lot of the findings on the built environment can also be traced to this idea of biophilia. Essentially, humans have this affinity to be close to nature because it helps you to expedite your rejuvenation and healing. So if you live closer to parks or if your neighborhood is aesthetically pleasing, right, it encourages residents to come out to exercise, interact with their neighbors, right, and that indirectly creates that opportunity for social bonding to augment social capital. It's not just the green, right? And there are certain built features like the places of worship, for instance, right? That also encourage people to come out to interact, to build mutual reciprocity. So you see that regardless of the type of religion, whether it's a mosque, a church, or a temple, and likewise in neighborhoods where it's more porous, it's not fenced off, right? For the residential estates, you see greater interactions on the ground. Now that neighborhood effect can also work in the opposite direction. So we look at neighborhoods that are very different in terms of their socioeconomic background, with income disparity, high degree of income disparity, and residents who are very different culturally, right? In that kind of diverse neighborhood, in general, you see less trust, weak social bonding, and also higher incidence of crime rate, right? So all that is also consistent with what Robert Putnam has found, right? When he studies social capital in diverse neighborhoods, typically that level of trust and bonding tend to be weaker. Now, in the context of immigration, that finding is somewhat mixed. And there are empirical evidence to suggest that in neighborhoods with higher concentration of immigrant, it's associated with lower trust. But on the other hand, there are also empirical studies to suggest otherwise, in part because of the strong kinship ties that they bring in as a family. So as far as this area is concerned, there's no conclusive evidence. Some suggest it's not so much of immigrant diversity, but rather deprivation, right? That is the main driver, right, for the lack of trust. Neighborhood effect also interact with individual level differences. And this, you can see that in terms of physical and mental health. The two diagrams that you see correspond to physical and mental health respectively. And the two vertical columns are on the left-hand side of each diagram represents low-income family. And low-income family typically experience lower, poorer physical and poorer mental health. But if they happen to reside in a higher income neighborhood, right, low income families but reside in higher income neighborhood, right, you tend to see a marked improvement in terms of physical and mental health. And part of that is due to the buffering effect of a better neighborhood, right? It created an illusion of well-being, so to speak. Now, in the case of Singapore, what we're trying to find out will be different kinds of spatial data, different kinds of segregation, if you like, and whether that has impact in terms of how they experience, right? So we look at socioeconomic class, racial, and immigrant segregation. And in the context of class, we typically use housing prices as a measure of socioeconomic background. So a higher socioeconomic background will be represented by a darker tone of red, right? And you can see most of the better neighborhoods, so to speak, right, will be they are concentrated in the central area, right? And we can do the same, right, for racial segregation, right? So in Singapore, you have a housing policy that puts a limit to the different quota based on the quota of the ethnicity of the residents. So with that, if you look at the locations of apartments where we have reached a different ethnic quota, you can kind of give you a pretty accurate insights on where the different segregation of different races. So here, the ethnic Chinese are the majority group in Singapore, and we see much of the segregation in the central locations. For ethnic Malay, which is a minority group, you see mostly in the north and in the east. For ethnic Indian, also another ethnic minority in Singapore, it's more scattered, but mostly along the peripheral of the island. And lastly, we have immigrant community, right? And again, it's mostly scattered along the peripheral ends of the island, right? So apart from the social environment, we could also look at the built environment. We can distill where is the nearest amenities, right, that promote shared experiences like community clubs and national parks. So if you have a postal code of your respondent, you can easily obtain the proximity to the different amenities that promote shared experiences. So importantly, we combine the different data, right? We look at the built and social environment, right? And we want to see how the environment shapes your individual level experience, right? And on the whole, what we found was there is a lower level of immigrant rejection if you live in areas with a lower concentration of immigrant, right? And there's a higher social trust if you live in areas with higher immigrant density, in areas with higher immigrant density, or you live in areas with lower ethnic minority density. And lastly, if you live close to a community club, or being close to the community club, it predicted less immigrant rejection in areas with high immigrant density because of the amenity, creates opportunity for interaction, right? So all of that is in a forthcoming article in SIR. All right. So finally, how you can consider your own research context and see what may be some of the features that you can extract for the analysis. So this is one in the US, Minnesota, right? Looking at how the Asian restaurants became popular. And what you find is that in locations of the Asian restaurants, typically there's a high concentration of ethnic Asians, right? So you can consider using that as a proxy of the profile of the residents, right? And how that can value add to your research, right? To sum it off, it's helpful if you can get the residential postal code of respondents, because that gives you an idea, where they live, the kind of experiences that they get day to day. You can look at the amenities that is surrounding those postal codes, and this is grounded from contact theory, of course, right? You can use the resale housing prices in the neighborhood, which is typically a reflection of class, the context of the interactions, and lastly, if you can get some kind of features that can inform the density of different residents, right, of in-groups and out-groups, that will be quite useful to, can serve as a form of symbolic threats, in their life experiences. Right. So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you so much for attending the IIR 2021 webinar. My name is Chan-Hoong. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email. Thank you and have a nice day. Thank you.